Dear Laura, I hope you are doing well, and I'm very sad to have to contact you in this way. I have always tried my best to talk about ideas rather than people in this debate, and have no wish to make this personal regarding others or myself in any way. However, material from your new book has been drawn to my attention which I know to be factually untrue, and which erases myself and other ethnic minority women not only from a discourse but from a physical space. I am sure that you would not want this to be the case and will be eager to correct your statements and feel that it would be cowardly for me to remain silent when the work of women who I know have overcome a huge amount of adversity is being denied recognition by an influential public figure with whom I was educated. In your work, you accuse the non-feminist community of fascism and terrorism. While it is very easy to dehumanize people who disagree with you by pigeonholing them as straight white men, not to mention associating them with parasitic worms, it is my hope to remind you that it is beneath a woman of your intelligence to conflate opposition to feminist ideology with hatred for women, and that 91% of British women, according to the Fawcett Society's own statistics, in rejecting the feminist label, seem to agree.
This video is part of a series where I fact-check a number of claims that Laura Bates has made about men, boys, and the men's rights movement in her book, Men Who Hate Women. And to do this most effectively, I have taken the time to talk to some of the people that Laura Bates repeatedly talks about in a manner that I would describe as wholly inconsistent with at least 9 of the 12 National Union of Journalists core principles. In this video, I'm going to invite you to consider the expert witness testimony of a member of the much maligned and misunderstood GamerGate community. Bates discusses GamerGate in Chapter 5, The Men Who Hound Women, describing it as a mass harassment campaign that helped to develop and hone many of the tactics and techniques employed by internet trolls to this day. She describes it as a campaign predominantly led by white male gamers, targeting prominent women in the gaming community and subjecting them to slander, hacking, doxing, rape, bomb and death threats. She claims that feminist writers who dared to speak up against the abuse would find themselves subjected to similar threats, and that some game developers were eventually forced to flee their homes. And she describes how these harassers tapped into classic men's rights tactics by portraying themselves as victims and claiming that their targets were inventing or exaggerating the harassment for attention and to make male gamers look bad. You may not be surprised to know that not everyone agrees with this perspective, and indeed that Laura Bates's decision to omit a number of highly pertinent facts about GamerGate ultimately served to significantly undermine the credibility of her claims. Today's expert witness is well placed to perhaps fill in some of those gaps and also provide some insights into Laura Bates's perspective on this subject. Catherine worked in the games industry around the time of the GamerGate controversy and set up her non-feminist blog, Female Fed Up with Feminism, shortly before it commenced. Coincidentally, she also knew Laura during the time that they both studied at Cambridge University, and in advance of this interview reached out to her in the hope of discussing some aspects of her book. Predictably, Laura Bates simply ignored correspondence from both herself and her husband. In a moment, Catherine will share her thoughts on a number of crucial aspects of the GamerGate story, including the significance of the Not Your Shield campaign, and crucially the investigation conducted by the FBI. But to begin with, Catherine has asked to open with some introductory requests and comments, all of which I wholeheartedly second and endorse.
So my first request is, please guys, do not contact Laura, do not contact anyone from her side of the debate, no matter how polite you are. They will probably ignore you, or they'll say that you're harassing them. They will turn any kind of constructive criticism into evidence of harassment. Don't Secondly, in the topic of GamerGate, certain people were receiving really awful threats, rape threats, death threats. I myself received those once. I want to say that anything like that is completely unacceptable, threatening any kind of violence whatsoever. If you see it, you should report it. Anyone who is caught doing that deserves to have the full force of the law. It's illegal. It's just not acceptable, and I don't want anyone to think that I would ever be advocating that. And as I will talk about, most named members of people who considered themselves to be gamergaters agreed, and when they did see behaviour like that, they always reported it, and in some cases actually exposed people who were doing that. I did go to university with Laura Bates. She was the year below me at university. We kind of knew each other to say hello to. She always seemed kind of perfectly nice, but I'm not going to say anything personal about her. Like what her personality is like has absolutely nothing to do with whether her arguments and her evidence are right or wrong. So I wouldn't want to make it personal in any way. I don't really follow her work until this book was brought to my attention. I had no idea that she'd written about witch accusations, which I've spoken about as well. Genuinely had no idea that that had been a topic of hers. I would also like to say I'm not trying to silence her in any way. I rejoice her right to speak. I rejoice her right to write and publish her work. I would never ever want to silence her or anyone else for that matter. But I think that's very different from criticizing and from drawing attention to content which is factually and demonstrably untrue. What else? I feel like my authority, is that the right word? My right to speak about GamerGate comes from the fact that just before GamerGate happened, I was working in an office full of game devs. And it was really not a sexist place to work. And yet there were more male ones than there were female ones, but there were some female ones. And every time a girl came to get interviewed, sorry, my mouth's going up. Ugh. Every time they were interviewing a female for a tech position, everyone in the office would get so excited and would want her to do well. And many of them were hired while I was there, but when they couldn't be hired, people would be disappointed and they would be like, oh, shucks. And just it was just such a lovely environment, and it was a nerdy environment and a geeky environment where I do feel very comfortable. I'm more on the kind of like fantasy anorak horror movies from the 1970s type of nerd culture rather than the gaming side of nerd culture, but I felt like I did have an insight into that world, and I was very much aware of, actually I do recall Laura Bates talking a lot about sexism in the tech industry, and just thinking, I work in this industry, it's not like this at all. And I do remember that when people would come out and say, no, I don't, females or ethnic minorities would come out and say, I don't feel that this is a sexist or racist world, people would dogpile on them and they would get shut up pretty quickly. And that did happen with some pro-GamerGate people as well. Yeah, so I think this idea of like, what is it? Great minds discuss ideas, mediocre minds discuss events, and small minds discuss people. I've always tried to discuss ideas in this debate. I've always tried to keep it away from people. But if we're going to start talking about GamerGate, not that I started it, she started it, but I think you do have to start discussing events and people, because there's just so much nitty gritty and you do have to pick apart all the kind of nonsense. So I'm sorry for if I am going to start talking about individuals, but it is to prove a point that the mainstream narrative created around GamerGate is just false. The Zoe Post, which this was August of 2014, when I was pregnant with my first child and was so sick I could not get out of bed, and I had my laptop over my belly, and I was really worried that my kid would think that certain GamerGate YouTubers was his dad, because I was listening to a lot of it. So somebody called Aaron Joni, I think you pronounce it Joni, wrote a blog post called the Zoe Post, and I think Laura does mention this in her book. So the main points that I need to make about this are, firstly, Erin Joni, hopefully I'm pronouncing it correctly, and Zoe Quinn, his girlfriend at the time, they were part of this very social justice conscious tech community. He was very much into all of these social justice ideas. They were vegans together, and they would sit there talking about like how to be ethical and everything. And she, in this post, he talks about how she talked a lot about her moral standards, and how one of the reasons he's writing it is because she violated those. So as an example, he said that she felt that if you're cheating on someone, any sex that you're having in your relationship becomes non-consensual because you're lying to them about stuff. So just as an example, he felt that she had behaved in a very unethical and also emotionally abusive way, and she did claim to be an activist sort of against all of that emotional abuse. Secondly, and Laura does repeat this, everyone repeats this, it's not true that he alleged that she was sleeping with people to get positive reviews of her game. You can go and read the Zoe post, just Google it, it has not been taken down. He at no point alleges that that was the case. What he was talking about was that it's this community of like a kind of, not a community, but like this kind of cabal of people who are in certain positions in the gaming media that were I don't want to say trading favors, but that were doing each other favors, and it was all about pushing this social justice ideology, but also pushing their own careers and their own reputations, and they all knew each other, and there was all this stuff going on, and it really was dishonest, and it was also holding actual gamers in contempt. There was a mailing list called the Game Journo Pros mailing list. Yeah. And this was how Milo Yiannopoulos got his foothold in this whole GamerGate conversation. And what he did, this mailing list had been around for something like 10 years. I think it was started in maybe 2010. And it was, but there are many other, I think there are many journalist mailing lists like that. And I think there had been another one that had some leak had happened, and it showed that there was like collusion to push things in this social justice direction. And what Milo did was he leaked things from this mailing list that absolutely demonstrated and absolutely showed that the gaming press was colluding to push the social justice narrative and to stop, because by this point the Zoe post had erupted. A lot of kind of tension, it kind of erupted because of it, because I think a lot of gamers had felt that like monkey business was going on. So soon after the Zoe post, somebody called, what was his name, Internet Aristocrat, made some YouTube videos about it, which are now taken down because he kind of like he had enough of GamerGate because he felt it hadn't gone far enough or whatever. And he was talking about how particularly the gaming media just wanted to push this social justice stuff on people. And then it was just taken up by a lot of YouTubers. There was a lot of people wanted to discuss GamerGate, particularly on these websites like Kotaku, any kind of gaming discussion board. And what people found to be happening was discussion of GamerGate was being banned on these sites, and posts were being deleted. You couldn't discuss it anywhere. And that is one of the reasons why it was driven, I think, to 4chan and then later 8chan, but it drove the discussion to these YouTubers. It drove the discussion to Twitter. It actually drove people to start doing their own journalism. It was a big mistake. It was a really big mistake, because these people, in order to protect themselves, because they knew they were in on this, and they knew they were getting busted, by silencing, what they did was they caused this whole new media basically to be created, and that is kind of almost the after effects of that are still here today. I think the logic was, even by this very early stage, I think they were saying it's slut shaming. But I mean, none of them really cared that she had or had not had relationships with these 5 guys. I mean, I guess people were kind of like joking about it, but that wasn't what people were really talking about. Nobody cares who Zoe Quinn has had relationships with. Nobody genuinely cares. But I think it was from the very beginning, I think it was the harassment narrative. And what Milo's leaks from this Game Journo Pros list showed was there absolutely was ideological collusion going on. And I've just actually extracted something from one of the leaks that is very important. Would it be okay for me to read that out? There was this slew of articles that did appear to be coordinated in the gaming media, and they were called the Gamers Are Dead articles. And I think, I could be wrong on this, but I'm pretty sure Milo kind of timed his leak to come out just after this. And so somebody wrote, I won't mention the name of the person, but he was discussing the Zoe Quinn scandal. And this individual wrote, "I don't want, in essence, to reward the jerks doing this by giving their issue any attention at all. I'm not even going to give the BS journalism ethics excuse for these attacks the time of day." And then he continued, "I would love to use my platform to reproach this kind of behavior, but that would go against Quinn's valid and understandable desire not to have this personal matter publicized by the media. Maybe we should just stick to Twitter to boost the signal on this one rather than our front pages. Maybe we should get a public letter of support going around decrying these kinds of personal attacks, signed by as many sympathetic journalists, developers as we can. Maybe we should just use this as an excuse to give more attention to her work. I know I've been meaning to review Depression Quest, which is Zoe Quinn's game, since its stream release." And then, yeah, so that is very, very clear that this is a pro-social justice narrative. They don't want to air the grievances. They don't want to air the other side, but at the same time, the desire is to push this narrative, push this ideology, and support these women. And it's very clear, and it's in black and white. And another member of that mailing list also chose to leak stuff, as well as Milo. And this person stated, "Some of the members on that list actively used their platform to support and propagate a wide-sweeping media narrative based on lies and factual inaccuracies." So it is, to me, that personally did prove the collusion, and it also proved it to many other people who were out there. Most people are just so, even at that point, they were so bored of this. Like, it's most normal people don't subscribe to this kind of SJW worldview, and they're bored of having it pushed on them. I think what I should also talk about is how the gaming community wasn't the first community where this had happened. It had happened in several other online communities. First, it happened to the Wikipedia community, and this ideology tore the Wikipedia community apart. And secondly, it happened in the atheist community, which it also tore apart. And I don't know if you recall, but Laura actually uses, for some citations, a website called the Skeptic website. She uses that website for her citation that fathers never ask for custody, and they don't want it, and when they ask for it, they get it. Okay. And it's just a blog. It's just a blog that belongs to a lady called Rebecca Watson, and she was at the center of the kind of schism that happened in the atheist community. Literally, I'm kidding you not here. She was at some atheist convention talking about sexism and atheism. And in the elevator, it was called Elevator Gate before GamerGate. A guy at 4 o'clock in the morning asked her, "Would you like to come to my room for some coffee?" He asked her out for coffee, and she blew her top. And it kicked off this huge thing about sexism in the atheist community. And the result of this was, you can't make this up, the result was the creation of something called Atheism Plus. And it was atheism plus social justice. It was atheism, and it had to be plus feminism, plus social justice, plus anti-racism, plus all of this, which just sounds so daft. But that was literally the playbook of what was happening, and is still happening. People like that are going into these communities, realizing that they can talk about these issues and get a huge amount of attention, a huge amount of funding, a huge amount of status, a huge amount of exposure. And when this did happen in the gaming industry, I don't think they were expecting the pushback that came. I think they just thought it would be the same as all the other communities, nobody would stand up against them. And there was also, what's her face, Stephanie Guthrie in Canada, I think. And she basically had a man taken to court called Gregory Allen Elliott for basically just disagreeing with her. And I have a feeling that these people, they thought that they had even the justice system in their pocket. I don't think these people worried about telling the truth. I don't think they worried about covering their tracks particularly. And I think this came as a big surprise to them, the way that the game has stood up. And I think certainly the reason it got my attention was because it was like, hang on a minute, these people aren't taking this. They were important to me. And I know this, I don't wish to sound patronizing, but I was so proud of them and so amazed by their ability to stand up and say no in the face of being called every dirty name under the sun and having every dirty trick in the books thrown at them. They never ever stopped. And the fight, they rose to this fight. And what happened with the other side was that the other side realized they were going to have to up their level. They were going to have to up their game. Yeah. And woo, did that fight get dirty. I think I should probably talk a bit more about the actual GamerGate and what actual named visible public GamerGaters were talking about and what they were asking for. Yeah. And so what they were asking for, the first kind of things that they were doing was they were messaging some of these gaming websites, asking them to change their journalistic policies, change their ethics policies, make sure that they were more honest about any kind of like, to recuse themselves from any personal connections and things like that. And some of them did change their policy, so that was a win for Pro Gamergate. And then what they started doing was they started messaging advertisers on some of these websites who were not covering the story in an honest way. And there was a whole shebang, like Intel actually pulled their ads from Gama Sutra, or I think Gama Sutra, possibly Kotaku. And then the anti-Gamergate side piled in on Intel, really piled in on Intel, and they reversed that and then gave a bunch of money to these supposed victims and changed their policies and everything. But to me, that was what the actual named people, mostly on Twitter, who were Gamergaters, were doing and talking about. There were concerted efforts to uncover these trolls, to report the trolling. There was a real concerted effort. We had a saying within GamerGate was, "Don't touch the poop." Yeah, there's just stuff out there that you don't touch it because it's poop and it's toxic. And I feel like in Laura Bates's book, what she's gone out there is she's gone and found the poop. She's gone and looked for the poop instead of trying to find an actual argument to argue with us just touching a load of poop. She made this video series called Tropes versus Women. But I think she also collected a lot of money for some other videos that didn't materialize. I think that was the criticism of her. And her Tropes versus Women videos were really daft. Like, they were just daft. And now she has a pack where like you can teach that in schools, and it's just they were just very easily debunkable, very easily like one-sided, ignoring a lot of the actual data, a lot of the research. So it was Sarkeesian, and then there were several other women. So it was Zoe Quinn, and who's the other? Breanna Wu, and the other one is Randy Harper. And these are sort of self-appointed, self-professed anti-harassment activists. So this was their career, and it's the only time you ever hear about these people is in GamerGate. It's the only time they ever got any attention. It's the only time people were giving money to them. And I can add links for you. They got invited to the UN. They got invited to speak at, Google Ideas, a think tank. They got invited to speak in front of Congress. They got a huge amount of publicity, everything out of this. And the other ones, not so much Sarkeesian, but the other ones, if you look into their history and you look into their past, they I don't want to, I want to make sure that I'm saying this in a way that isn't like accusatory towards them, but they have had difficult lives, and they have, it looks like they've been in the past in a lot of situations that didn't turn out well for them. And I can understand how they may have ended up feeling humiliated. Like, if like there's so many people that came back from their past to say, look, actually this person did this and whatever. And I can put links to all of it below, but I don't want to feel like I'm smearing these people, but at the same time they're smearing people like us. So, but I can kind of understand why they maybe felt that the world kind of owed them something.
A local video game developer in hiding tonight after receiving death threats via social media. News Center 5's Reed Lamberty is live in Arlington. And Reed, this all started with comments about the lack of women in the gaming industry.
Well, I believe one of the other women that she chooses not to name is Breanna Wu. And I think Breanna Wu is probably the easiest one to say. Like, literally, they proved she hadn't left her house. She'd done some kind of interview, and that, like, you could see these patterns on her wall. And then she did an interview after she claimed to have fled her home, and she was clearly in the same office. And the other thing about Breanna Wu, God bless her, like, every time she spoke, it was a different story as it suited her. So the first time was, oh, I got these messages, but I just tried to ignore them. And then another interview when it suited her new narrative was, yeah, I was afraid for my life. I couldn't call, like, and then the next narrative, it was, yes, it was like this. And she also, I'm pretty sure Breanna Wu got caught trolling herself. I'm pretty sure, like, I can find a link to it, but like, she was one of the ones that kind of got caught with her pants down. A couple of the other ones did as well. Zoe Quinn particularly has a history of, what's it called? The website Something Awful, which is it's like an SJW friendly site. She was caught having sort of like harassed certain people. Somebody called Randy Harper, she's one of these self-appointed anti-harassment activists. If you go and read how she treats people, she is like one of the worst bullies out there. It's go kill yourself, go F yourself, go set fire to yourself. You're a disgusting person. And like, I don't want to dredge up stuff from anyone's past, but she looks like she has had a past that was not easy. And then suddenly these women found themselves, and I mean, kind of a bit like Laura, like from really early on at the beginning. Laura, I remember her saying, I remember it because it was the last time I ever listened to Woman's Hour. It must have been like 2013, 2014. And it was about Facebook and some awful stuff that she claimed to have found on Facebook. And she was saying, Facebook have said that they're going to work with us to la 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 la. And it's like, I'm sorry, but who died and put you in charge of deciding what can and cannot go on Facebook? Like all these women from supposed GamerGate targets, like nobody gave them a mandate to be invited into Google and into the UN and to be consulted on these policies. These threats came from God knows where. I'll talk a bit more about where they came from later, but nobody died and put them in charge, and yet they were put in charge of this. What was their mandate for being put in charge? Receiving threats. Well, people from the other side received threats. People from the other side were doxxed. Like several, some male journalist, I can dig out his name, got swatted. Like Milo Yiannopoulos received a hypodermic syringe and a dead rat at his home. Does that validate anything he says? Should that mean that he should be put in charge of something? No. And again, if some of these people, if you look at the way they speak to people from the other side and the way that they bully people and silence people, there is an argument that they are guilty. There's a strong argument that they are guilty of everything they accuse others of. Another story that's very important, and it's such a good story, I will make sure there's a link below. There was a Twitter account called Mumbot, who was like
didn't show their face, but their persona was a Japanese housewife who was kind of pro GamerGate, very kind of never did swearing or anything like that, but it was very, very, very influential pro GamerGate account. And Mumbot and had some buddies tricked the other side into doxing her. So somebody of Mumbot infiltrated some chat group and said, oh, I think I know the identity of Mumbot. It's a white man. Let's dox him. And they doxed him, and it was fake. It was a fake dox. But it just showed you these people, like, all they would do was go in front of whatever panel they were invited and say, these people dox our identities, la 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 la, and they got caught doing all of those things. The hypocrisy is just on another planet, and the way that they would harass particularly women who disagreed, particularly people from within the industry. They stopped going after kind of prominent GamerGate people, but what they would go after are people that were kind of in there, supposedly that agreed with them, journalists, but who kind of gave an inch to the other side. And there was, well, what's her name? Sorry, Jennifer Dorr, particularly. I think Jennifer Dorr was a game dev, but she had some sympathies. I think Randy Harper went after her really, really badly. Certain male journalists as well, whose names escape me. Like, they really, really got bullied, particularly by Randy Harper. Yeah, every single thing they accused the GamerGate side of, they were guilty of themselves. Everything. One of the ways that I kind of describe GamerGate to people is, so say the gamers were fighting this fight. They were fighting the fight to have ethics in games journalism, and they just didn't want the ideology in their hobby. Like, get your ideology out of our hobby. And this was a very diverse group of gamers, as I'll talk about when I talk about Not Your Shield. It included, it wasn't about not liking women or not liking feminism. It was about not liking the ideology. That's the fight they were fighting. And to anyone who looked at that, they won that. But the other side, they weren't fighting the fight like this. They were fighting a different fight. They were fighting the fight for the mainstream narrative, for everyone to believe that these gamers were straight, white, male, conservative, misogynists. And they knew they just had to convince everyone in the mainstream of that and to keep this story out of the mainstream. So they weren't fighting like this. They were fighting like this.
Yeah.
And they won this fight, the anti-GamerGate, they won that fight as well. It was two different fights. They were never fighting like this. And I think that's the similarity with that's the microcosm of, as you say, what's going on with this book here. It's not the fight to argue the points. She won't tell you the points. She won't say what these fake statistics were. It's just to discredit so that nobody looks, because they know that if people look, they're going to find things. As again, the parallel with Laura's book, this narrative, they won't leave GamerGate alone, particularly since the election of Trump. What the left have chosen to do with the dead body of GamerGate is they've chosen to turn it into their boogeyman. And they've chosen to, what was that article? It was soon after maybe Trump was elected, or maybe just before. GamerGate was the coming out party of all these misogynists and right-wing Nazi whatever people. Actually, again, that really misses the point. I don't want to talk too much about it because I could talk all day, but the person who's done the best work, there's two people who've done great work on this. One is somebody called Brad Glasgow. He did it wasn't completely scientific, but he did do a survey of kind of known named GamerGate people. And he did establish that most GamerGaters did lean left, which they kind of did. And they leaned left on most of the issues. Say, for example, if you ask them about abortion or gay rights or whatever, like most people in the community had traditional sort of liberal views. And then the other person who has done work on this is the journalist Cathy Young. She was in on it from the beginning. And I'll link her article. She's written a really good kind of retrospective on GamerGate, and she's really good. She names loads of female GamerGaters. She really talks, she does, if you want an article to read, that's a really great place to start. I mean, even before moving on to GamerGate specific, Not Your Shield specifically, her omission from her entire book, there is not one mention of a lovely lady named Christina Hoff Sommers. It's not one mention I noticed, correct me if I'm wrong, the fact that she does manage to name check ContraPoints, which, like, so ContraPoints is one of the, possibly the biggest pro-social justice YouTuber that argues with the anti-social justice YouTubers. If you have any awareness of sort of YouTube, which Laura does talk about a lot, if you have any awareness of what's been going on in terms of this debate on YouTube, there's just no way you can't be aware of Christina Hoff Sommers. You just can't. She's been there from day one, ground zero, as the factual feminist. And she did weigh in on GamerGate, and the GamerGaters have a name for her. They called her their based mom, and based means like really cool. And there's just no, that to me, that reticence, like a lot of the reticence may be there by virtue of the research not having been done in depth, but I do believe that's dishonesty rather than reticence. I just can't. If you know who ContraPoints is, and she references Sargon as well. Like, if you know who they are, then you know who Christina Hoff Sommers is. Yeah. And because Christina Hoff Sommers is present as a feminist as well, I think obviously that's not something that you really want to have to acknowledge if you're writing a book like this one. But she did weigh in on Gamergate, and she spoke to the gamers, and she gave the other side, and they were so grateful. They were so grateful for it. And I went, there were two London Gamergate meetups, and I was at both of them, and Christina Hoff Sommers was at the second one, and I did get to, and Cathy Young was there as well, and I did get to say hi to them. But like they were just treated with so much respect and so much gratitude for their honesty, and just for the fact that they were prepared to give us a fair hearing. So I think I just wanted to mention that. And you can go and watch Christina Hoff Sommers' video about Gamergate from a few years ago. It'll still be there. I'd be surprised if you couldn't find it. And so yeah, to talk about Not Your Shield. So there were so many. The thing about Gamergate was that it was the first time that this opposition to the modern social justice movement was coming from these young, cool internet people. And it was the first moment when it became cool. And that's another reason why it was a really important moment to me, because when I started doing this, I started thinking, crikey, these people are up to some monkey business. I've got to start speaking. Pretty much out there, though, it was the men's rights activists. And I'm really grateful. I don't want to sound ungrateful, because they really put their necks on the line first, and they really took a lot of the flack for that. But this Gamergate moment, and the honey badger, so these female non-feminist women were like one of the first on board the sort of the Gamergate situation. That's one of the reasons I found out about it very quickly. This was a really young, cool, internet savvy group of people. So it was very diverse. It was very international. There were lots of it was just so diverse. It genuinely truly was. There was one, what was her name, there was a disabled lady that made loads of videos about it. There were loads of ethnic minorities. The guy who was the first person to actually use the Not Your Shield hashtag happened to be a Black British male who lost his job over it. And yeah, he lost his job because he started speaking out with the Not Your Shield hashtag. And then suddenly, so after the hashtag started, there were loads of tweets about how, oh yeah, all these Not Your Shield accounts are just straight white men, whatever. And so suddenly this new trend happened of people holding up a sign with a picture of their face, and a lot of particularly the Asian ones, so many Asian people, particularly Asian women, holding up their passports saying, this is me, don't erase me, don't silence me, don't use me as your shield, don't claim you are doing this in my name, I want your ideology out of my hobby. And I don't know, to me, those images, if we can maybe try to display some at some point, like, to me, that is the image of Gamergate. An Asian woman holding up her passport saying, don't erase me. And of course, I I don't have a mandate from any of those people to be speaking here, to own any of their voices, to own any of their views. I do believe that many of them would own what I am saying now, and that's why I'm here, because I'm afraid to be here. I don't want to be taking this risk, but I feel like I owe it to them, because people I know, people I was educated with, are silencing them and blaming them for all the ills of the world, for the election of Donald Trump, for like Nazism, for whatever. And I feel like I'm letting them down if I don't speak and remind the world that they existed and that they do exist. In the FBI report, funnily enough, one of the things that wasn't redacted, because literally it was just pages and pages of redacted messages. One of the message from like the FBI, and it didn't say to which or how many of the females in question. It said, you need to stop going to the media with this. If you want us to investigate properly, you can't keep going to the media. So I think the Zoe Post was when it was August 2014. The FBI started investigating in, I don't think they started investigating much later than maybe September. Yeah, I think they started investigating it in September. So one month, I don't know what the exact dates are, but the FBI were looking into this pretty much as soon as it started. And the reason I think we didn't hear much about it was because they didn't release the actual report until very recently.
Yeah.
And also that report, I have read that report. It's heavily redacted, heavily redacted. But they have been looking into it from the beginning. And what the FBI report did uncover was it only ever traced any of these threats back to 2 individuals, neither of whom were pro-GamerGate. Neither one of them. Oh man, it's so redacted. It's kind of hard to realize who they're sort of talking about. But one of them, I remember these ridiculous videos came out of this guy in some like killer mask saying, "I'm GamerGate, I will kill you," and like we were all watching it and we were like, "What is this? Like, what the hell is this?" And I don't know, what was his name? I've got his name written down somewhere. I can provide links to all of this. We can put the links in the little bar. What was his name? John Rankowski. But he was saying that it was, I mean, obviously he was saying it was a joke, which is what you would say to the FBI. But I think he wanted to make GamerGaters look bad. And I think someone else that was making these phone calls was like, I don't know if I don't think they were pro GamerGate, but I think they were just an agitator, like a third party agitator, which I think a lot of this has been coming from. Because the question that you need to ask yourself is, who do these threats serve? Anyone who scratches the surface of GamerGate with any amount of honesty for 5 minutes is going to realise all you have to do is read the hashtag and see who was posting the messages from it, and all you have to do is look at the FBI report, and you can see that no named GamerGater ever sent any of these kind of threats. And it's all about the conflation of the threats and the criticism. And that again is that's part of what her book is trying to do, is to cause that conflation. Like people saying, hang on a minute, your statistics around the wage gap do not prove what you're trying to convince everyone it proves, which I would imagine is what some of these school kids are putting their hands up and saying. That is not the same as no woman will go out with me, therefore I'm going to go out and shoot a bunch of women. Like, that's not like that, but that is what is being conflated. That is being conflated. So I think it's just they're just too invested in this it's this narrative that they're so invested in, that they need so much, but this narrative is so fragile because anyone who looks into it will see that it is false. And that's why you've got to call for the censorship from big tech so that people can't find out that it's false. If you're the one that started it, you've got to keep escalating so that you don't get busted. Like I mean, just as an example, yeah, one of Anita Sarkeesian's events was cancelled because someone did a bomb threat, and that's one of the reasons the FBI was investigating. And I actually think if there are bomb threats and rape threats and threats of murder, I think that should be investigated. Like you cannot make threats like that. Like that's not okay. But for example, in Cathy Young's article, she talks about how she was at a panel or a meetup in somewhere, and they had a bomb threat phoned in as well, and they had to all go outside or cancel the event or something. You know, it's everywhere, but the mainstream is only interested in that one side of the narrative.
Yeah.
And I think maybe this segues into what I want to talk about with where are these threats really coming from, and who do these threats really serve? Because they certainly didn't serve any of the sort of mainstream Twitter, mainstream is the wrong word, but the sort of the named active vocal Twitter gamergaters who were always very, very anti-harassment threats, would try and uncover wherever these threats were coming from, reported it in certain instances. And we are going to have to talk about a lovely lady called Candace Owens. Way before she evolved into her current persona, she came on the scene with this initiative called Social Autopsy, and I think she launched a Kickstarter, and the way that she described it was going to put names to the trolls. It was going to put names to these accounts. And yeah, the Gamergaters, to start off with, we were like, this is stupid, because actually she hadn't invented a way of finding out who was posting anonymous messages, but her idea was so daft, and she has since admitted how daft it was, God bless her. The idea was that, like, if you knew someone who had posted something bad, you could go and put it on a database with a screenshot or something, and then that database would be searchable. But this idea was just so, it was just so daft, God bless her. A lot of people thought, and I remember having this moment of reading all her stuff thinking, how does this work? Because it kind of sounded like she'd found a way to unmask trolls. And so she wrote these 3 blog posts about what happened, all of which have since been deleted, because I don't think she quite likes this narrative. I don't think she wants this to really be part of her narrative that she kind of did come up through as a result of Gamergate. But what happened was she got a phone call from Zoe Quinn, and she had never heard of Gamergate, which I think she really must have not done her research into online harassment, because how you could wade into this not knowing what Gamergate was, God bless, I think she was just so naive. And she was confused because of the way Zoe Quinn was talking to her. First she thought Zoe Quinn was from Gamergate. She was really confused, and Quinn was saying, you can't unmask these people, it's a form of doxing them, and these people just are misunderstood, and it was just completely bizarre. And then apparently Zoe Quinn shouted at her, she burst into tears and said, you'll ruin everything, and slammed the phone down. This is the way Candace tells it in her blog post, told it in her blog post, by the way. And then Candace says within minutes and maybe a couple of hours, because her phone call took place in the evening, apparently, suddenly the inbox of her Kickstarter of her project was being flooded with really, really bad, sexist, and also because Candace Owens is African American, really, really racist messages, using the N-word, all this kind of stuff. And she thought, gosh, that's weird. It started minutes after she'd annoyed Zoe Quinn. And then the other thing that to Candace was a smoking gun was that there was some kind, I think it was her email address that she'd used to email Zoe, but she hadn't used her personal email address on any of the other communications for her project, started receiving some of these messages. And she was like, this has to be coming from this area. And the thing is, we do know, I mean, during the whole propagate, because this was quite late in the day, can't remember, maybe it was 2015 by this point, I don't want to put a date on it, but
we knew they were trolling themselves. It was so obvious they were. It was the only time they got any attention. It was the only thing they had to talk about. So after this this happened to Candace, she started speaking to the GamerGate community. She started realizing what was going on, because honestly, she thought Zoe Quinn must be the leader of GamerGate. She just Googled it briefly. She was really confused. And then I think Cathy Young was one of the people that started talking to Candace, because we were like, what is going on with this girl? Like something weird is going on here. And then Cathy was like, no, she's genuine. She's genuinely confused about what's going on here. And she then started thinking, hang on a minute, but the GamerGate people are the ones that are being kind to me and that are asking for my opinion and that are asking to talk to me. And then because she had started talking to GamerGate people, a bunch of journalists, was it Jussie? No. Jessie Singal. I was going to say Jussie Smollett, but that's a whole different story. Jessie Singal was one of the people that were like, oh God, here she goes. And I think Jessie Singal has since been has realized, I think, that he was part of something that he really didn't want to be a part of. That was kind of unsavory, but I think he really came at her. Again, Randy Harper came in on this, and I think she was one of the people that was instrumental in getting her Kickstarter taken down. But I think her story is important because it really says something about where are these messages coming from and who does it serve. Because if you think about like your run-of-the-mill GamerGater like me, that's the worst thing from our perspective that can happen, is that someone we disagree with gets one of these threatening messages, just on the most basic level. Why would any of us want them to receive these kind of messages? I think a lot of stuff, and again, this is why the Game Geno Pros leak was so important. It really just showed what does go on behind the scenes, and the Mumbot doxing thing. It shows that they do get together to try and expose, like do one of these cardinal sins. Like if you talk to anti-GamerGate, like doxing is a cardinal sin, and that they are fully prepared to do that to other people. And also like some of the people that came forward, like I hate that we can't keep coming back to Zoe Quinn, but like one of the people that came forward when all of this came out was what was her name? Marcia, I don't want to get this wrong. Sorry, I'm just gonna look up the name of this person. Mallory Nasrallah. So I can link to Mallory's, I think she posted the story on Facebook. She had worked with Zoe Quinn and had basically been treated so badly by her, like, and all these stories from like Quinn had assaulted people, and her story is that they had assaulted her first, but because of it she couldn't get a job, and like so much stuff came out, obviously all of it unsubstantiated. Like I don't know which party's telling the truth and which is lying, but Mallory's claims have no more or less proof than Zoe's do at the end of the day. And they're both women, so who do we believe? Like, these people have done all the things, all the abuse, all the harassment, all the lies that they're accusing others of, they're being accused of. And actually recently, what was the date of this? I think it was maybe 6 months ago, maybe a year ago. Zoe Quinn came out basically with a Me Too accusation of her ex-boyfriend, whose name was, he had like a, what was his name? I'll try and, okay, hang on, let me, Alec Holoka, I think his name was. So she came out with a Me Too accusation that he 10 years ago had like somehow lured her to move to his city away from all her friends and sort of isolated her and abused her. And within a few days of her making that Me Too style allegation, he had committed suicide. And I'm not at all saying that every word of it could potentially have been truthful,
But it was the kind of allegation actually that she could have gone to the police with. Aaron Joni's, the Zoe Post, none of what he was accusing her of was against the law. He was accusing her of manipulation and dishonesty. And he was saying, look, there's corruption within this industry that she's involved with, and people have a right to know. I mean, even that, there's an argument that he shouldn't have done that. But this accusation that she made she was accusing him of illegal stuff. Yeah. And within a few days, he was dead. Yeah. So what does that say? This book is a hit piece. Yeah. It's just a hit piece. And I actually thought, hang on a minute, how long did she take to write this? Funnily enough, I looked up whatever her last publication was, like just to compare the dates. But I think it looks like she basically wrote it in a year. It's possible she may have been working on it before her other book, but like it looks like she had a year to look into. She looks into so many different communities. And not only that, she looks into those communities, but half of all those chapters are also talking about her experience from what she hears from these school kids and what other people like her are trying to do to combat this. So it's a huge amount to pack into this one book and to do in this really quite a short space of time. And it has the quality to me of maybe like a series of articles, a series of like editorial articles or something like that. Is that the right word? Or investigative articles or something. It's really not, I wouldn't say that it's the level of research that you would want to put into an actual book, if that makes sense. I think, just having read Laura's book, I think I sense this because she says like over the past couple of years, the things that these kids in the schools have been saying to me are different, and it made me write this book. I actually think she's maybe started realizing somewhere deep down that all this fuss that, and again with these GamerGaters, all these threats that they've done and all this stink that they kicked up, they created what came after in terms of the whole Trump business, in terms of the whole Brexit business, in terms of like your average Joe being really wound up by this. Like just they've had enough of it, like the gamers had enough of their press just ramming this ideology down their throats. I think the way that they won't drop this GamerGate horse, they won't stop blaming it for Trump. I think it's because somewhere they've realized they did this. Their activism caused GamerGate, their activism caused Trump, their activism caused Brexit. And I think again, because these two things she keeps coming back to are the censorship on the internet and bringing it into schools and pushing it on young people, I think is because they're realizing that they're losing the next generation. They're losing the next generation. Like the whole PewDiePie thing. Again, PewDiePie must have been aware of GamerGate. But, you know, when they called PewDiePie a Nazi, he has, I mean, at the time, I don't think he had 100 million followers, but he had something like 94 million teenagers watching PewDiePie. They know he's not a Nazi. They know he's not a Nazi. And I have the great privilege of having quite a few young people, sort of teenagers in my life that I can talk to and ask questions about. They aren't having any of this nonsense. They're really not. They're really not going to have it. And they're not stupid. They're not stupid. Like, they watch PewDiePie. They know he's not a Nazi. A young woman who I'm lucky enough to have in my life she's doing her A-levels at the moment and is mixed race, told me that she led a group of her friends to go to her teachers and actually ask them to stop with all this social justice stuff, to stop ramming it down their throats. And I think that's the generation that we're fighting for now. That's what this book is about. That's who we're fighting for.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.